Working the night shift as a rideshare driver in Chicago meant you saw some strange things. Drunk college students, sketchy characters, people having the best or worst nights of their lives. But nothing prepared Jack for last Tuesday night. He'd been trying to make sense of what happened, checking his ride logs over and over. The addresses were there, the timestamps matched, but the rest, he needed to write it down before he convinced himself it was all in his head. The first pickup that night was at 11:42 p.m. Regular fare, nothing unusual about the request. The pin dropped at the corner of Dahmen and Milwaukee, outside that old dive bar with the neon sign that never quite worked right. The passenger rating was good, 4.8 stars, account created 2021. Sarah M. He pulled up to the curb, and there she was, mid-20s, brown hair cut in a neat bob, wearing a green wool pea coat. Nothing remarkable except for how unremarkable she looked. Like a stock photo of a young professional come to life. "Thanks for stopping," she said, sliding into the back seat. Her voice was soft, slightly hoarse, like she'd been at a loud venue. "I need to go to 1879 West Palmer." He punched in the address. It was in an industrial area, mostly abandoned warehouses. Not the best neighborhood, but who was he to judge? "Long night?" he asked, pulling away from the curb. Making conversation was part of maintaining a good rating. "Yeah," she replied, then fell silent, staring out the window. The drive was quiet after that, just the hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional ping from his phone. When they reached the address, she got out with a quiet "thank you" and walked toward one of the warehouses. He waited until she reached the door. Company policy and basic human decency, you know? She disappeared inside and he marked the ride complete. 3 stars. She was polite but weird, pretty standard for late nights. The next fare came in at 12:17 a.m. Different part of town, up by Wicker Park. As he pulled up to the pickup point, his stomach dropped. Standing under the streetlight was a woman in a green pea coat, brown bob, same height as Sarah M. What on earth was going on? Was it one of those costume parties where everyone dressed up as some sort of character? If this was a coincidence, it was a mad crazy one. Different address, though in the same area, and a different account. She got in the car. He was pretty sure she had the same face as Sarah M. But it was slightly off, like a photo that's been taken in poor lighting. Her skin seemed paler under the streetlights, her eyes darker in the shadows. 1879 West Palmer, please. Same soft, hoarse voice. There was no way it was a different woman now. He turned around to get a better look. "Didn't I just drop you off there?" She tilted her head, confused. "No, this is my first ride tonight." "But you're..." He stopped. What was he going to say? "You're the same person, but something's not quite right?" He has to calm down. Maybe she had a personal reason for doing this, and it wasn't his job to pry. His job was to get passengers to wherever they wanted to go. And if they wanted to go back and forth 5 times in a night, who cares as long as he was getting paid? Never mind, must be thinking of someone else. The drive was silent again, but this time the silence felt heavy. In his rearview mirror, he could see her staring straight ahead, unblinking. When they passed under streetlights, her reflection in the window seemed to lag just a fraction of a second behind her movements. Same destination, same quiet "thank you," same walk to the warehouse door, but this time, he could have sworn the door never opened. She just reached it and was gone. His hands were shaking as he marked the ride complete. 2 stars. Something was very wrong. 12:52 a.m. Another ping, a different neighborhood a little further out, but his heart was racing. "Please, please, please," he begged inside his head. "Please let it be a man, or an old lady, or anyone, anything except that green pea coat." But of course, even before he turned the last corner, before reaching the pin, something told him he knew what he'd find. And there she was, green pea coat, brown bob, Rachel T., 4.8 stars, account created 2021. 2021 again. The moment she stepped into his car, the air seemed to grow impossibly thicker, harder to breathe. She moved with an unsettling grace that made his skin crawl. Not obviously wrong, but like someone who had studied human movement but hadn't quite mastered it. Her face was familiar now, burned into his memory, but in the shifting light of passing cars, something about her features seemed to slide ever so slightly, like a painting viewed through rippling water. The peacoat was identical down to the slightly loose third button, but the fabric didn't move quite right when she settled into the seat. It stayed too still, too rigid, as if it were painted onto her frame. 1879 West Palmer. The voice was still soft and hoarse, but now it had a subtle echo, as if she were speaking in a tiled room. Each consonant seemed to hang in the air a moment too long. He merged into traffic, his palms sweating on the steering wheel. The usual sounds of the city seemed muffled, distant. In the rearview mirror, he caught glimpses of her between streetlights. She was smiling, but the expression never reached her eyes. Those remained fixed, unblinking, reflecting the passing lights like polished glass. The car's temperature display showed 72 degrees, but his breath was coming out in faint puffs. The radio, which had been playing quietly, began to emit a low static that rose and fell like breathing. "Why do you keep getting in my car?" he finally asked, his voice cracking slightly. Her smile widened, just a fraction too far for comfort, but she continued to look straight out the window. "This is my first ride tonight." "No, it's not," he insisted, gripping the wheel tighter. "This is the third time. Same coat, same address. What's going on? What's in that warehouse?" She didn't answer immediately. In the mirror, he saw her tilt her head at an angle that seemed just slightly beyond natural. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes, for just a moment, they seemed to catch the light wrong, like a cat's eyes in darkness. "You should be careful," she said finally, her voice now layered with what sounded like the same words spoken a fraction of a second apart. "Some questions don't have answers you want to hear." The rest of the ride passed in suffocating silence. Every time he checked the mirror, she was in a slightly different position, though he never saw her move. The static from the radio grew louder whenever they stopped at traffic lights, forming patterns that almost sounded like words. It took everything in him not to go insane. At the warehouse, she stepped out with movements that were too smooth, too precise. He watched as she walked to the door, her heels making no sound on the concrete. This time he was certain. She didn't open the door. She simply ceased to be there between one blink and the next. 1 star. Jack sat in his car for several long minutes, engine idling, staring at the warehouse. The logical part of his brain was screaming at him to go home, to log off, to forget this ever happened. 3 identical passengers, all going to the same address? The strange movements, the echoing voice, the impossible disappearances. Every instinct honed through years of late-night driving was telling him to get out of there. But there was another part of him, the part that had always gotten him into trouble, that needed to know more. What was happening? Were these women connected to the missing persons cases he'd been seeing on the news? Was he witnessing something supernatural, or was there a more mundane explanation? A cult gathering of sorts? The questions burned in his mind, demanding answers. He thought about calling the police, but what would he say? That he'd given the same woman 3 rides to a warehouse, but each time she was slightly different, more unsettling? That would sound crazy. And maybe it was crazy. He also had absolutely no proof. Each account was under a different name. Maybe he was tired, his mind playing tricks on him after too many late nights and too much caffeine. His finger hovered over the go offline button. 1 tap, and he could end this, go home, try to forget. Instead, he found himself checking the time. The rides had come in exactly 35 minutes apart, if the pattern held. His phone pinged. 1:27 a.m., Madison Street, Lisa P., 2:03 a.m., North Avenue. Jennifer B., 2:38 a.m., Division Street, Catherine M. Each time, the same woman, but subtly wrong in ways that made his skin crawl. Each time, the same address. Each time, the same claim that it was her first ride. The wrongness was getting worse, but in ways he couldn't quite put into words. Lisa's movements were too precise, mechanical. Jennifer's voice had layers of echoes that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Catherine's eyes seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and when she spoke, her words seemed to bypass his ears and appear directly in his mind. All 4.8 stars. All accounts created 2021. By the time the 3:13 a.m. request came in, he was nearly hysterical, but he accepted it anyway. He had to see how this ended. The woman standing at the pickup point barely maintained the pretense of normality. The pea coat hung wrong, like it was suspended in water. Her hair moved independently of the wind. Her face, Christ, her face. It was like looking at all the previous versions at once, reality stuttering between them like a glitching video. Mary S., 4.8 stars. Account created 2021. She folded herself into the car with movements that seemed to skip frames. He couldn't look directly at her in the mirror anymore. His eyes simply slid away, refusing to process what they were seeing. In his peripheral vision, she was a suggestion of a shape wearing the memory of a green coat. 1879 West Palmer. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a chorus of all the previous versions speaking in broken harmony. But by then he hardly reacted to it, was already expecting it. His GPS glitched, the screen filling with copies of the same address, overlapping and repeating. Then the car seemed to drive itself. He couldn't feel his feet on the pedals anymore. As they pulled up to the warehouse, he finally broke. "What are you?" She leaned forward. Her breath on his neck was like static electricity. "Check your ride history." He pulled out his phone with trembling hands. The night's rides were all there, but something was wrong with the timestamps. They weren't in chronological order anymore. They all showed the same time, 11:13. The next pickup should be due in about 10 minutes. "You're not going to make me do this again," he said. But when he looked in the mirror, the back seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. He checked the warehouse. The building was gone. Not abandoned or demolished, but simply gone like it had never existed. In its place was an empty lot with a single sign, "Coming soon, Echo and Palmer Luxury Apartments, breaking ground, 2021. His phone pinged. New ride request, Patricia R., 4.8 stars. Account created 2021. He deleted the app, sold his car the next day, started working days at his cousin's grocery store. He did, however, spend the next few days researching. The rideshare company's records showed he never drove anyone to 1879 West Palmer. They said that the address didn't even exist in their system. But they did find something strange. Last Tuesday night, 8 different women reported that their accounts had been used to request rides they never took. All 8 accounts had been created on the same day in 2021, November 13th. It didn't take long for Jack to find a particular news story from November 13th, 2021. It reported a structural collapse at a construction site during the initial demolition that had killed 8 women who'd been working late at Palmer Design Studios next door. The building had been evacuated, but they'd gone back in for project files needed for a morning deadline. The article included a photo from their company website, the design team standing together at a company event, all wearing matching green pea coats, a gift from their creative director. The article mentioned their plans had been scattered across the rubble. Architectural drawings for luxury apartments. The development was supposed to break ground the following month. One picture in the news report showed an empty lot with a sign saying, "Coming soon, Echo and Palmer, luxury apartments breaking ground, 2021. Sometimes late at night, his phone still pings even though he hasn't installed any rideshare apps. And when he checks it, there's always a new notification. Your ride is waiting, 4.8 stars. Account created 2021. He doesn't look out his window anymore after midnight. He's afraid he'll see a woman in a green pea coat standing under the streetlight, waiting. And he's even more afraid that this time, her face might be his. He still wonders if they ever found those project files in the rubble, or if maybe, just maybe, those 8 women are still trying to deliver them, night after night, to an address that no longer exists.